I read it all the time in the comments of woodworking videos. This isn't DIY. Or, oh, it's easy when you have a workshop full of thousands of dollars worth of tools. So, for all of you people out there who think you need a workshop full of tools to do anything, here's an end-grain cutting board made with only hand tools. Not that any of you will see this. Before we get started, it is possible to get dimensional hardwood boards that are sanded on 4 sides from big box stores. I picked up these maple and mahogany 1x2s from Menards, but you can order them and have them delivered to a Home Depot near you. Yes, it's more expensive, but you're paying for all the milling and sanding. I started out by clamping a regular old Stanley miter box to my workbench. Most things can be built without power tools, it just takes a lot longer. I put the saw in a 90-degree slot and measured out 15 inches and then clamped the stop block down. If this is going to work, you have to be as consistent as possible with your cuts, and definitely check for square and make sure everything is lined up before making each cut. Here I'm just cutting down the 1x2s into 15-inch strips. I cut out 14 in all, but I ended up using 12. This is by far the easiest part of the build. The plan is to glue 2 faces of each species together to form a 2x2, then alternate to eventually form the checkerboard pattern. The pieces are barely tight enough to fit together without the need for planing, but after moving things around, I got something that works. There's going to be a lot of glue ups for this board. I think I did 12 in all. I had to do it in sections so it would fit in the miter box in order to make all the cuts. I'm testing out one of the sections before I glue it up to make sure it fits properly and that I can clamp it down while I'm cutting. I did the glue up in 2 sections comprising 6 strips each. I used cawls, and this is a must for these glue ups. They're just flat pieces of wood covered in packing tape. If it's not flat, you're going to be sanding forever. Granted, it still felt like I was sanding forever even with using the cawls. For the first glue up, I used a chisel and some 80 grit sandpaper to get rid of the squeeze out, and of course I lost the footage of that. After getting rid of the glue, I lightly sanded up to 220 grit. Now you could just glue all of your pieces together at once and have a nice end grain cutting board, but that wouldn't make for a very good video. So let's keep going. I started by cutting off the end of each section, then rigged up a stop block, used some shims, and cut out some rectangular blocks. Each piece took around 90 seconds to cut, so I think I used a handsaw for around 30 minutes while making this cutting board. After cutting out all the rectangles, I knocked down the rough corners and arranged everything to form the end grain checkerboard pattern. I ended up changing my mind about the width of the board. It took a long time to get to this point, and I still had a long way to go. Adding the 2 extra rows was definitely not worth the extra effort, so I just decided not to use them. It's nice to have a little pile of sawdust rather than have it all over your floor because you're too lazy to install proper dust collection in your shop. Here are the rest of the glue ups. I glued 3 rows together in 6 separate sections. Then I glued 3 of the sections together. For some reason this recorded in slow motion so the footage looks weird when it's sped up. Again, everything needs to be flat for this to work, but spoiler alert, it wasn't all flat. One side of each section was nearly flat, but it still took 30 to 45 minutes of sanding to get everything level. The edges were also a bit even, so that took even more time to sand flush. I didn't care to record all the sanding, but this is basically what it looked like for 2 hours. Then I needed to address the bottom, which was worse off than the top. I decided that referencing the first row on the edge and sawing off a thin layer was easier than sanding forever. Surprisingly, it worked out quite nicely. So after about a week of work, the only thing left to do was to glue the two sections together, and do a little more sanding to get rid of the squeeze out. I sanded to 220 grit, then wet the entire board to raise the grain. After it dried, I sanded it down to 400 grit. Adding mineral oil was not as satisfying as it should have been. The end grain really soaks up the oil, and I had to add a lot more than I thought it would. I later added a coat of cutting board conditioner, which is just beeswax, carnauba oil, and mineral oil, which I found out I should have used first time for an end grain cutting board. So there you have it, an end grain cutting board made without power tools. Except for the finger groove I added with my router. I only did that because the board had a bit of a bow to it, but it looks great for something that was made with only hand tools. However, I'm never going to do something like this again. I don't recommend that anyone do this. The sanding and sawing got old after a few minutes, and I felt like stopping so many times. Anyway, thanks for watching. You can check out the written article using the link in the description below, which includes a cut diagram for making the checkerboard pattern, and you can follow me on Instagram at SlightlyCrookedWorkshop to see what else I'm up to.